Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 708. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about beef and beaches, soccer and survivors, wineries, and Wi-Fi as we go to the country of Uruguay in South America.
Heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Uruguay. I'd like to welcome the show Karen Higgs from Uruguay.com, who has come to talk to us about Uruguay. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chris.
And I have to spell that website because I want to make sure that people understand the joke and the idea of what it is, but it's Guay, as in Uruguay. And you are somebody who has written guidebooks about it, write a website about it, and you've lived in Uruguay for 20 years. So I feel that Uruguay seems like a appropriate definition of what you do.
And it also means that people stop confusing Uruguay and Paraguay.
Ah, okay. Excellent.
Which is the bane of Uruguayans' lives.
Sure. No, we actually do not have a show on Paraguay, and it's not for lack of trying, and I'm trying to line one up for next week. So hopefully we may have one back-to-back and then talk about the difference, but we're not talking about Paraguay. Today we're talking about Uruguay, which is not how the Uruguayans say it, but we'll get into that. Karen, why should someone go to Uruguay?
There are two types of people that come to Uruguay. There are the type of people that have been everywhere. And so they are looking for the last off-the-radar destinations to go to. And when they arrive, they'll love to say after, I am the only person that I know that's been to Uruguay. So that on one hand. And then on the other hand, people who do their research, they are interested in going to Latin America. They do their research. They're looking for a safe country especially solo female travelers, for example. They're looking at South America and they are Googling, and then they're like, hey, there's this small country that's there between Argentina and between Brazil that just seems to have all of these amazing statistics of development. How is this? And then they look at it more closely and they discover that not only is it a progressive country, and it's been a progressive country for 150 years, with complete separation of church and state written into the constitution, the kind of country where women were given the vote well before places in Europe, where the 8-hour day has been in place for over 100 years. And then they'll look and they'll say, hey, and it's also got amazing beaches. And from what I can see, nobody goes to those beaches. And it's got amazing wine. And how come I've never tried one of those wines? And then, when they start and they are really looking into it and they find my website, etc., then they'll go, oh, my God, it's got all this amazing world-class live music. And I can go to these shows and be up next to an amazing musician, and it won't even cost me $10. And then somebody will say, the beef is just amazing. And then somebody's like, but I'm a vegan. And it's like, but now you can even get good vegan food in Montevideo. So, basically, it's a laid-back, small by South American standards. It's very large compared to a European country, but it's small enough to be able to get around, and it's developed. And so it's kind of like a good starter country where Latin America is concerned. It's not in your face.
Excellent. And I did mention that I'm pronouncing this Uruguay, and we talked about this ahead of time because that tends to be the English pronunciation. If I was from there, I would say it how?
Uruguay.
Okay.
So with a U, Uruguay. So when you hear people on the football terraces, football's huge in Uruguay, and you'll hear people saying Uruguay, Uruguay, which sounds totally tribal when you think about it, which is kind of funny.
And what kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
You asked me for a 1-week itinerary. Of course, I know that you're thinking of an audience primarily based in the US, so sure, it's a long ways to get down here. Mm-hmm. But my work has been to really say, Uruguay is a country in of itself. There's so much to do. So really, you want to spend as long as you can here. It's not a side trip, because a lot of people, it's a side trip from Argentina, mm-hmm. or Brazil. So I'm normally saying you need to come here for your entire 2 weeks or whatever, but I know that people in the States have shorter holidays. So in that case, what I would suggest is a combination, 3 nights in the capital, because there's stunning Art Deco architecture here. In fact, apparently, after New York, Montevideo is the city with the most Art Deco architecture in the world, and it's all over the place. Like I said, amazing live music, beautiful rambling. We have 10 beaches here in the city, great cafes, great wine bars, great food. So 3 nights for that. 3 nights, and I'm going to say, depending on the person, it's either going to be 3 nights at the beach or 3 nights in an estancia, which is our word for a ranch. And you've got ranches to suit all levels of luxury and all pocketbooks. So going from super, super rustic, where literally you can stay with a gaucho couple and live as a gaucho would here. I mean, it's stunning. It's like parachuting into another reality. It really, really is. Or there are also luxury estancias where you do get to go out and horse ride every day at high speed if you want to. There's no, in the UK, there's all this kind of concern about health and safety gone mad and that you can't do anything. Well, here in Uruguay, none of that, is taken into account, so people can go off and have amazing horse riding vacations in an estancia, help out the gauchos with the sheep and the cattle. It's really special, and it's very, very authentic. And then for the last night, but if somebody was coming from Buenos Aires, then I would recommend it being the first night, and that would be a night in wine country. We have the most lovely wine country. It's being compared to Tuscany in Italy, But because we're super close by, right, you'll arrive. If you come from Buenos Aires, you've got an hour-long ferry ride, and then you'll take an hour-long bus journey or drive your car to deepest wine country, where you will be received by the friendliest winery owners, who are the people that actually make their wine as well. Normally, they are the fourth or fifth generation of Italian or Spanish winemakers. I know that in the States, people are used to going on wine tastings. You'll be lined up with a bunch of people, and then it's do going through the process. Here, a regular wine tasting takes all morning. And you're going to be there 3 hours tasting generous pours, and by the time you leave, you'll feel like you're a friend of the winery owner. And I think that's the thing, is that in Uruguay, the people are super, super friendly, but very accessible as well. And so everybody talks about how Uruguay inspires affection in visitors. And afterwards, they often return. They always stay in contact. And I've been told by serious country brand experts that this is extremely unusual, that a country inspires affection in its visitors.
Excellent. You mentioned how big it is. I do want to do some comparisons. If you're from Europe, it is about half the size of Germany. If you're from the U.S., it is about 50% larger than, say, North Carolina or New York. So not a tiny. We're not talking about something the size of Rhode Island, but something that is, again, one of the smaller countries in South America.
Can I just clarify there?
Yes.
Because when talking about it being small, I think that in general, especially if somebody comes for just a week, then you will be confining yourself to the southern part of the country.
Right.
And so if you fly into the capital, Montevideo, you can get to wine country that I'm talking about next to the Argentine border in 3 hours by car. And then to the east from Montevideo, you are driving to gorgeous beaches 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours away. So you can see how accessible it is, especially for people from the States that are used to driving. It will feel like it's small.
Excellent. And then you started us in Montevideo. What are you going to recommend we do in Montevideo?
I think that the best thing to do is to, first of all, get acclimatized to the lifestyle here. And so that means taking things slowly. I would recommend going out for all of your meals. So going out for breakfast, going out for lunch, going out for dinner, and sleeping long siestas. In Montevideo, the locals don't sleep siestas at midday like they do in the interior of the country. But what they will do, and you're going to want to do this because you're going to want to be able to get through to a 10 o'clock or let's say 9 o'clock dinner time, and then go out and see a show after. And that show is not normally going to start until 9 at the earliest, more like 10, sometimes 11. Now, to be, people always say to me, how on earth do you get through to a dinner time at 10 o'clock? And so I'm like, well, what the Uruguayans do, because they work normal hours. They start work at 9 and they finish at 6. So what they do then often is they go home, they'll have something nice and filling and like maybe a hot drink, and then they'll go to bed. They will sleep for an hour and a half, then they'll get up, have a shower, and they'll go out for dinner. And so that is the way to do it. So my suggestion would be in Montevideo, what you're going to want to do is have a nice base to stay. And the hotels are great. Of course, there's Airbnbs as well. Be prepared to walk. If you stay in the old city, which is the most picturesque and the most historic part of the city, you can walk absolutely everywhere if you're based there. But also, it's easy to get around on public transport. And Uber is also very cheap and reasonable. And the nice thing about it, Uruguay being such a progressive country, the Uber drivers have all of their rights. they're not unfair competition with taxis. And so you can feel fine about using Uber as well. So that's another nice way to get around. But I would say, like hang out, museums, I don't particularly rate them hugely, primarily because they often don't have any signage in English. It's more the kind of place to hang out and get a feeling of where you are. And so to do that, I would say, like go to some of the restaurants that I recommend in my books, for example. And there I always mention the names of the owner. Like go and hang out and like ask for the owner and get into a conversation with them. Go to Montevideo Wine Experience Wine Bar and just like hang out at the bar there and chat. And that is the way to really experience Montevideo, I think. But I have to add, you do want to go and see live music. There's the most amazing live music on most days of the week. I just can't believe in a city of 1.5 million people how much there is. It's like in Uruguay, you lift a stone and a musician crawls out. The quality is incredible. And so there are lots of places to go and see live music. And I'm talking about small places, right? There are also some lovely big concert halls as well. But the small places especially are super lovely.
Okay. And I'm going to pause here for a second because I want you to get in a little more detail with a couple different things you've said.
Ooh.
But we'll start with the music places, then we'll jump backwards a little bit. Specific place, if you only had time to go to one small place for music, your favorite would be?
Can I say two?
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to say Tribu, which is like tribe, but with a U on the end. Tribu, which is a chic little multi-purpose art and gourmet space in a beautiful Art Deco house in the Palermo neighborhood. And they've got live music, performance, or dance most evenings. So that, okay. And this is where I'm going to say to you, here in Uruguay, clubs and bars, they use Facebook and Instagram very actively, and they'll list that night's show on their page. So as long as you know where it is that you're going to go, then you can actually access their info right then and there. And just a little tip for your listeners. Nothing is done in advance in Uruguay. Nothing. Not even the school holidays for the year are decided in advance.
What?
And so I'm serious. I cannot believe it when I see that in the UK, my niece's holidays for the next 4 years, they know exactly when they are. Here, no, that does not happen at all. And so do not contact a venue and expect to have them tell you what's going to be on in next month. They're not going to have any idea. In fact, Tribu, this place that I mentioned to you, their owners are Uruguayan, but they spend half the year in Barcelona. And so they came with a lot of ideas that they were doing in Spain to implement here. For example, a monthly calendar. And then the locals were saying to them, can I book for such and such a show? And they'd be like, well, but that's in a couple of weeks' time. Oh, well, why did you tell us about it now?
Oh, geez.
So here you don't plan anything in advance. You go with the flow. That's very important to know. So what you're going to do is you're going to use Facebook or Instagram primarily to find out what's going on. And then what you can do is actually write to them and say, can I reserve a table? But to be honest, in most places, you really don't need to reserve. And that's including restaurants as well. Okay. Most of the year, it's something that you don't really need to do. And then the other place I wanted to mention to you, which I love, is a little bar called El Mingus, which Mingus is the Spanish pronunciation of Charles Mingus's last name. Okay. It's a little place that used to do a lot of jazz, but right now they are doing a candombe night, which is a very typical type of Uruguayan music. And they're doing like a candombe jazz fusion night, which is really special with some of the most amazing young up-and-coming musicians. That happens every Tuesday night there. So a little shout out to them. It's a real institution in this little bar.
Okay. And then I wanted to jump back and get a little more specific. You had also recommended that there were lots of places to eat and to stay. And I didn't quite jump in and say, is there a particular hotel or neighborhood you would recommend we stay?
Well, I have a soft spot for the old city, which is where originally I got into tourism. My husband and I opened up a little guest house in the old city. I love the old city just because it's the colonial part of the town. It's where Montevideo was founded. So the buildings are absolutely lovely. A lot of Art Deco, a lot of colonial architecture. It's the only really socioeconomically mixed neighborhood in the whole of Montevideo as well.
Okay.
And that's a really interesting vibe, I think. Plus, the gourmet food scene there is really amazing. If you'd like to stay closer to a beach, now I don't recommend going to Montevideo for a beach holiday. I just want to be clear about that.
Okay.
There are just the most fantastic deserted beaches 2, 3, 4 hours away. And so you wouldn't come to Montevideo for a beach holiday specifically. But if you're there and, you'd like to go for a swim, then fantastic. You totally can. There's a neighborhood called Pocitos, which has a very nice beach there. But to be honest, as I mentioned, Montevideo is such an easy city to get around either on foot or by public transport that you could stay anywhere and easily go to the beach if you want. The chances are the furthest away you'd be in any accommodation would be 15 minutes by Uber.
Okay, got it. And then restaurants, particular restaurants you would recommend?
The place, and it's a tourist trap, the Port Market. The Port Market has been referred to as Disneyland for carnivores. It's an old, 100-year-old market, built in a British style. It looks like the inside of a British train station from 100 years ago. It was actually the same makers architecturally built this market. You'll see the pipes all have, made in, and then the north of England, a town in the north of England mentioned it. So it's in this, and then it's full of stands with barbecues and open flames everywhere. It's not a kind of market where there's raw food or fruit and veg. It's a market to go and eat roasted, grilled beef.
Okay.
And so
I can practically smell it from the pictures, I would say.
Well, as you're walking towards the market, you'll see the smoke that envelops the place hanging over it from like 2 blocks away. The Port Market is an experience. I mean, you can't not go to Montevideo and not go there. But in that case, because it is a bit of a tourist trap, you definitely need to know which stand to go to. And I've heard reports from people that, they're like, oh my God, I wish I'd followed your recommendation because, I had a experience. And the next day I went back to your recommendation and it was amazing. So the stand that I recommend is called Cabana Veronica, Veronica's cabin. Okay. And Veronica, her family has been in the Port Market since 1987. And she is the only woman stand owner in the Port Market. So I'm like, kudos to you, Veronica. She runs a really tight operation. The food is really fabulous. I've never known anybody have a mediocre experience there. It's amazing. Shall we talk here about what you should order?
Sure.
Because what happens in general is that people from the States think they should go and order a steak, and they shouldn't. You shouldn't.
Okay.
What you should do is you should start with a sausage, okay? That's a chorizo. Or if you really want to look like you know what you're doing, you should ask for a pamplona. Pamplonas it's like a wrapped piece of pork or chicken And inside it has cheese. Uruguayans love to put cheese in everything, just to let you know. It has cheese, it has ham, it has olives, and it's wrapped up very tightly. And then it's placed on the grill and cooked. And that is a classic starter from Uruguay. It doesn't exist anywhere else, in fact. People will say that, oh, well, this is in Argentina as well, because there's a shared culture, what's known as a river plate culture between the cities on the east of Argentina on the River Plate, so Buenos Aires, and then Montevideo on the other side. But Pamplona is a Uruguayan creation. So ask for a chorizo or a Pamplona to start, and then ask for a tira de asado, which is beef short ribs, okay? And that is like a huge portion of ribs. The ribs are only condimented with salt.
Okay.
Just salt. The difference is that in Uruguay, beef is cooked on the grill over wood.
Right.
In Argentina, it's cooked over coals. So here it's cooked over wood. And so the secret is then, and I know that people will be like, what? But no Uruguayan would ever ask for those ribs anything other than, at the least they would ask for them as medium, but most people are going to ask for well done. And the reason is that the beef here is so good, even if it's well done, it doesn't get tough, it just gets tastier. And the texture is great. And the fat gets all crunchy. So funny because I talked to Veronica about this. I'm like, let's write something for the guidebook about how people should order their beef. And she's like, my God. I'm like, you have to say well done for ribs, right? She's like, well, yeah, of course. She says that the importance for that is that the beef acquires the aroma of the wood. And if you cook it for less time, it just does not have that aroma and that flavor that cooking over wood gives it and the time that it needs. If you really can't do that, as Veronica always says, you can always ask for it to be cooked a bit more. So in that case, you could ask for it for medium and then send it back to be cooked a bit more if you wanted. Just so that people know, the tira de asado is enormous. It's like 3 sets of ribs altogether. And so you can actually ask for half portions. But if you've got a decent appetite and there are 2 of you, I would say kind of like get everything to share and sit at the bar. Always sit at the bar. In Uruguay, when you can, sit at the bar because it's just a better experience. You're more integrated. And also, the cook, he's got his eye on you, you've got his eye on him, and he's going to make sure that you're going to eat well as well. He doesn't want anybody looking like they're having a bad time. And then you can just order more because it'll normally come on a hot tray with coals underneath to keep it warm.
Excellent. Well, and we need to move on from Montevideo because we're really only doing the first 2 days so far in this city.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
And I didn't talk about any other restaurant either.
That's okay. Sounds like we'll be full for 2 days afterwards anyway. Before we leave the city, is there any other sites that you want to recommend or, walking tours or any activities that you want to suggest? And then I think we should move on.
The Rambla has to be walked. And the Rambla is Uruguay's waterside promenade.
Right.
It stretches for 15 miles, unbroken, along the River Plate. And it's absolutely wonderful, especially at sunset. So any neighborhood that you're at, chances are you're going to be staying right next to it. So you're going to walk there. And Montevideans use it all the time, day or night. It's wonderful. If I were to suggest one museum, I love the Andes 1972 museum. It is about that crash that there was in the Andes where a group of young rugby players were the only survivors. Yeah, they were the only survivors. The plane was Uruguayan. They were all Uruguayan. And they survived 72 days in the freezing temperatures. It is one of the most amazing survival stories of the 20th century. And the museum is a private initiative run by a guy called Jörg Thompson. I mean, the reason that I made the joke about Paraguay and Uruguay is that so few people They don't have any idea of Uruguay, unless they're football fans. If they're soccer fans, then they'll have a good idea. Because Uruguay's football team, despite the fact that Uruguay is a nation of 3 million people, Uruguay has the most successful international soccer team of anywhere in the world, more than the Argentinians, more than the Brazilians, imagine. Anyway, going back, the reference for Uruguay is Homer Simpson pointing to the globe and saying, "Oh, you are gay. There's a country called You Are Gay." And the owner of the Andes 1972 Museum is an international businessman, and he said that he was so fed up of going to international conferences where when people would say, "Oh, where are you from?" he'd say Uruguay, and they'd go, "Oh," he's like, "What?" Uruguay needs to be on the map for other things. And one of the things that I feel strongly about, he said to me when he told me about it, was this amazing survival story, one of the most amazing survival stories of the 20th century. And so he set up this museum. It's a total labor of love. It's a small museum, but it's beautifully done. It has a ton of information. It's in 4 languages, and it's so good and so enveloping that the average visit time there is 2 hours. And so people really get sucked in. It's not recommended because of the content for children under 12, unless it's a mature child and they've been talked to about what the story is about. And some people fear that it's going to be macabre or it's going to be salacious, but it's very, very sensitively done. To be honest, it's uplifting because it's about the capacity of the human spirit. I'll always say to my readers, when you go to places, say that you're here because of Uruguay. So the owner, being told this by a couple of people, actually introduced them to one of the survivors who was with him having coffee one day. So that was pretty special.
Excellent. Well, and we're gonna have to pick up the pace here a little bit. Where are we going after Montevideo?
Well, I would say that in general, visiting a beach here depends on the kind of travel that you like to have. Because as I've already explained, Uruguay is very laid back. Going to the beach, that means that it's even more laid back. Chances are you'll get to the beach, you'll have lunch, you'll have a siesta, you'll go back to the beach, applaud the sun going down, because people like to do that here. They like to, everybody goes to the beach and then applauds the sun going down.
Does that not happen some days is why we're applauding?
It's so funny. It's a tradition here at the beach.
Okay.
Does it not happen elsewhere?
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, there you go. So that's a big thing that people like to do here. After that, it's time for a cocktail and then going out for dinner. And so time at the beach just melts away. And you will find that because of the slow pace of Uruguay, then you are going to get into a very relaxed state very quickly. And so for some people, if that's what they want to do, then I would just say, choose a lovely beach, choose a nice place to stay, and just do that. And it's going to be fantastic. You're just going to have the most memorable, relaxing time.
Okay. Could we get a little more specific? What beach should those people choose?
There are very different types of beach. You've got Punta del Diablo, which is the closest to the Brazilian border, which is a very kind of hippie, laid-back beach, very rustic.
The
then
beach
you've
of
got
the devil.
The beach of the devil. Yeah, exactly. The point of the devil's point.
The devil's point. Oh, that's right.
But then we've got a beach like Jose Ignacio, which is a tiny little peninsula. We're talking about 6 blocks by 7 blocks, something like that. But it's actually during peak season. In fact, I was just reading an article in the Times of London. They were saying that it has the shortest, most expensive high season in the world.
Okay.
And that people pay it, but it's still shabby chic. It's low-rise houses, people paying huge amounts of money to rent these houses at high peak season, which is, just so that you know, between December 24th and January 10th. Those are the dates that I would say to avoid.
Okay.
The prices are crazy anywhere. Places can be packed by Uruguayan standards. You go after that and you go back to being on almost deserted beaches again. And I think that's what most people want nowadays. Jose Ignacio, though, is the kind of place where Shakira, Sean Parker, people like that go on holiday to be normal.
Okay.
To eat at a restaurant, to walk down a sandy street because the streets aren't paved, to go down to the beach, to come back. It's totally laid back. There are no paparazzi. It's a place where people go, where there's a valet parking sign in the sand, and you're going to eat at a beach shack, which is now La Huella is the name of the most famous restaurant there, which started up as a shack on the beach selling fish and is now one of the only Uruguayan entry in the 50 best restaurants of Condé Nast in Latin America. But it's started off as a beach shack, and it's still pretty much that. You know, you go there in your flip-flops.
Okay.
And then you've got beaches that are totally unspoiled. And there, in that case, I would say to go to somewhere like, for example, there's a beautiful little glamping site. They don't like to call it glamping, but it's the best way to describe it. They're canvas domes in the middle of the forest. It's a place called Big Bang. And they are in a little beach that nobody knows called Sauce de Portezuelo. And you could go there. You'll be in the forest. There'll be nobody else there. And every day you'll just trot down to the beach, and then you'll just trot back at night and eat with the family there. They've got a big long table and they can cook for you. And it's just totally laid back. So there are different options. It depends very much on what kind of thing that you like to do. If you're the kind of person that likes to explore, then I would say to hop from one destination to another. So to choose maybe 2 or 3 beaches, and then just drive to and explore other places from there by car and go to a different beach every day.
Okay.
Because everything is so close to each other. The first beach, Sauce de Portezuelo, and then you're going to drive an hour to get to your next destination, which could be La Barra, for example.
Okay.
So, and then your next destination will be in Rocha, which is a 2-hour drive, and then you're going to get to Punta del Diablo. So many different places that you could stop off.
Excellent. Well, where to next then?
We had said that wine country would be a great option, and there are about 15 regions throughout Uruguay. But the ones that I've gone into more detail on are either close to Montevideo. I mean, literally, Montevideo has wineries 10 minutes away by car that you can go to, and fabulous wineries 45 minutes away. So you could actually stay there if you wanted in a little guest house or posada, as they're called, or do trips out, day trips. The same thing when you're at the beach in this little area that I talked to you about, Sauce de Portezuelo. From there, in I think 30 minutes, you are in one of the best wineries of Uruguay called Alto de la Ballena. So it's literally somewhere that you could come and go in a day.
Okay. Now, the winery scene, you mentioned that plan on spending all morning at one winery rather than hitting 5 wineries in a day. What else should we know about that scene?
At the most, I would say 2 wineries. And to be honest, I would say 1 winery.
Okay.
Because otherwise you're rushed. And you really don't want to be rushed. I think that people that start doing research about Uruguayan wines come across a grape that's called the Tannat, Tannat.
Okay.
It's the signature Uruguayan wine. And I think that 1 out of every 3 bottles of wine produced in Uruguay is a Tannat.
Okay.
And so people get hooked on that. But to be honest, the wine scene here is so varied. Just to put it into context, the entire production of wine in Uruguay is the same scale, the same size as one medium-sized winery in Chile or Argentina. So we're talking about really boutique wineries. And so I would just mention, just so that people keep in mind, that there's a wonderful white called Albarino that people should keep an eye out for. And also winemakers have told me that the Merlot here if it wasn't for the fact that Tanat has everybody going crazy, that Merlot is another big one as well. There are also a lot of new vintages that are coming out that are not really well known elsewhere. I'm really into one called Marcellan at the moment. There are some amazing Marcellans.
Okay. That is not one I'm familiar with.
Yeah, there you go. I think that the winemakers here are being really savvy, and they're going for uniqueness in what they're producing because they know that they can't compete on a massive scale. And what's interesting here is that Uruguay is the only entirely Atlantic wine growing country in the world, because France has an Atlantic wine growing region, Bordeaux, which Uruguay resembles very much, the terroir, etc. But here, the entire country is influenced by the Atlantic, and that is producing really, really interesting wines.
Okay.
I actually visited 10 wineries because I'll confess, before writing that book, I always said that I was a beer woman.
Okay.
But what I realized was that all of the visitors that were coming here, like everybody had heard about the wine, but because of the small scale production, hardly anybody had had a chance to try it. So they're like, oh my God, I want to try it. So I realized that when I was writing the Uruguay book, I was really going to have to do wines justice. And so there I visited 10 in 3 of those regions that are closest to beaches, closest to Montevideo, and chose ones that were very different one from the other, some bigger, some smaller. But what they all had in common, what they were producing great wine and that they loved to receive visitors. So that was why I chose those. But I think a little tip that I would say to you is thinking, especially if people decide to fly into Buenos Aires as opposed to Montevideo, is that there's a wonderful wine country in an area called Carmelo, which is, how to get to there is, it's 3 hours by car from Montevideo, or it's 1 hour from the town of Colonia del Sacramento, which you told me that you'd been to.
I have been
which
is just across the river from Buenos Aires.
Exactly. So it's just 1 hour drive, 1 hour ferry ride from Buenos Aires. And so you can get there, and then just 1 hour drive north is Carmelo. And that's amazing because it's this beautiful little town producing wonderful wines, and the wineries are all in the same area, and so you can bike from one to the other. And so if somebody's really into wine, you know, instead of doing 3 days at the beach, I'll do 3 days there and just visit all of the wineries and just bicycle from one to the other.
Well, and as long as we're mentioning Colonia del Sacramento, that is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And so this is a lovely little colonial village, small place, colorful, very touristed at this point, because you get a lot of traffic that's coming over day tripping from Buenos Aires. But it is a beautiful little town.
And the secret to visiting Colonia del Sacramento is to go on a weekday.
Yes,
because then it's almost like it normally is.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense to me. Excellent. Anything else about the wine country that you want to mention?
I think one winery that I absolutely love for a day trip is called Artesana.
Okay.
It's leading the vanguard of a new generation of winemakers in Uruguay, many of whom are women. And it's an easy 40-minute drive from Montevideo, and then you end up going through the countryside lined with pampas grasses and the occasional little roadside shrine. And what makes Artesana really special for a visit is that they do the most wonderful lunch. Their cuisine really stands out. It's really adventurous, and they use a lot of the byproducts of the wine in their cuisine. So that's really fantastic. I love Artesana. And if you don't have time to dedicate yourself to actually going out into wine country, then there's actually the chance to visit a premium winery within Montevideo itself. And that's run by Manuel Filgueira, who's considered one of Uruguay's top 3 winemakers. And his winery is in a little neighborhood, a beautiful little neighborhood full of lots of lovely historic buildings called El Prado. And he makes really limited editions. We're talking about, say, 300 bottles of complex age wines. And when you go, you're doing the tasting with the winemaker himself. Manuel is there. It's a really special. He's an amazing guy, an amazing character, very knowledgeable. Despite the fact that he's making these really sophisticated wines, as a person, he's so down to earth. It's just a really, really special visit.
And I have to ask, because I heard you say 300 bottles of wine a year?
Yes! An edition, yeah. One edition, maybe just 300
The reason why
bottles.
I ask is, so I live in California, MA wine drinker, wine drinking in the weekends when we could leave our our home and go someplace is a very common thing that we will do. And we might drive up to, say, Livermore Valley if we're looking for someplace that is close by instead of going all the way up to Napa and Sonoma. And a small winery there, something that we would consider boutique here, would be about 3,000 cases of wine a year, and that's considered a small winery. That's they only make about 2,000, 3,000 cases a year. So that sounds like something someone would do in their basement here. So it's interesting.
Imagine. Well, there you go. Now you're getting to grips with the scale here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Excellent. And now, does that wrap up your itinerary? Do we want to get to our wrap-up questions, or am I missing something else that you mentioned that we weren't going to talk about?
No, that's fine.
Excellent. Well, then let's get to some of our wrap-up questions.
Okie dokie.
One thing that's going to be the biggest surprise for people when they come to Uruguay, a lot of people don't have preconceived notions of this country. What is going to take them by surprise?
The level of technology incorporated into day-to-day life here.
Okay.
Mixed with a very rural environment. Uruguay is actually one of 7 countries in the world which are called the D7, the Digital 7.
Okay.
That designation has been given to Israel and Estonia and other countries that have really taken their e-government work to another level. So what shocks people here is that it's a very underpopulated country. You talked about the size of it earlier.
Right.
I come from Wales in the UK. Mm-hmm. And in Wales, we have the same size population, 3 million people, as Uruguay does. But Wales is actually 9 times smaller than Uruguay. And so it's a very underpopulated country. In fact, there are actually 4 cows for every person here.
Okay.
And it's not industrialized.
Which is why they have to serve so much beef, is you have a lot that you need to eat to do your part.
Exactly. There's very little industry here. Mm-hmm. And so what surprises people is that they'll find that there's a high level of technologization. Does that word exist?
Yeah, well, apparently it does now.
Of the ubiquity. There's Wi-Fi, and it's free and easily accessible virtually anywhere in the country. Mm-hmm. So you'll arrive at the airport, and there's going to be free Wi-Fi for you. You could get onto a bus. There'll be free Wi-Fi on the bus. You'll go into any shopping center, any restaurant, and you just ask for the password, and you've got the Wi-Fi. If you go into the interior, Uruguay is actually the only country in the world that has totally nationally adopted the 1 laptop per child initiative. And so it rolled out in 2007. And what was lovely was that they rolled it out throughout the interior first. I mean, it's a typical situation, especially as Montevideo has half of the population of the country. The typical domination of a large capital, right, over its rural inland. In the case of 1 laptop per child, it was rolled out totally across the interior first, and then it came to Montevideo. The same thing, all old people here, or older people, they all have free laptops and subsidized access to the internet. So that kind of thing The fact that here you can get a taxi, you can just lift up the phone and dial 141, and then an automated voice tells you that your taxi will be arriving in 3 minutes. And it literally, you put down the phone and it does arrive in 3 minutes. And that service has been going for like 15 years. There's all sorts of things like that I think really surprise people. And the impression for most people here is that, wow, it's pretty much a developed country.
Excellent. Our wrap-up questions. You're standing in the prettiest spot in Uruguay. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
I am in the hills of La Valleja, which is about an hour and a half's drive away from Montevideo. And I am sitting in a wonderful hilltop restaurant made of 3 train wagons. And I'm looking out over a hilly region that's reminiscent of Greece, with rocky outcrops of white stone. And there are some winery, some vineyards, and tiny little houses dotted around.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize Uruguay in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I'm going to low-key.
Okay.
That's one word.
You're going to hyphenate that. That's all right. I'll give you that.
The people are low-key. They'll never shout out about themselves. I think because they have quite brash neighbors, they take pride in being low-key, low profile. Warm. The people here are so warm. I think that's really gets people. And then unspoiled.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Karen Higgs, and you may have missed this, but she's from Uruguay.com, and she writes guidebooks. And Karen, we've mentioned your guidebooks a couple times on the show. If we wanted to mention your website, is there one particular article we should send people to?
Yes, I actually have one about the 5 things you mustn't miss when you're in Uruguay. So it would probably be that one.
Excellent. I will put a link to that in the show notes. And Karen, thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for your adopted country of Uruguay.
Oh, thank you so much. It was absolutely lovely to be your first speaker about Uruguay in the last 11 years.
It's been a little while. It's not quite true. There's an episode that people can go back to about a cruise trip from Buenos Aires to Santiago, Chile. And that is the reason that I have been to Uruguay. Was the 2 places that I went to there were as part of that trip. One, we came in early and spent one of our days ahead of time going over to Uruguay from Buenos Aires. And then the cruise ship stopped in Montevideo. So that was a quicker trip there. Excellent. Well, thanks so much. It's so wonderful to meet you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's been really a pleasure. I've had a great time. And I'm looking forward to getting Uruguay on the radar for more people.
I had a fun conversation, albeit a brief one, with Jessica, who recently joined the Amateur Traveler Trips group, amateurtraveler.com/trips, which is where we decide where we're going to go for the Amateur Traveler trips. And as I usually do, I take a look at people's profile. I'm curious to see where people are from and what they do, and I'm just a curious person. And I saw that Jessica's image for her Facebook account looked to be Mayan ruins, and I thought it was Uxmal in the Yucatan. And so I wrote and said, is that Uxmal? And she wrote back and said, yes, it is. We actually went in 2018 after I listened to your Merida episode. We now love it there. We stayed in a small fishing village called Sisal. Love your podcast. I listen all the time. Made my day. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be